directly, the United States exert, in my opinion, great pressure upon the Europeans to support them in their defense of the existing world order, in the existing power structure, and to support their strategy. And they do everything in order to force the Europeans to align according to American interests. So, but on the other hand, I have the impression that the United States quite often pursue their own foreign policy, especially in Europe, without taking into consideration European interests. The United States have certainly won the Cold War, have dramatically expanded their sphere of influence in Europe, but have practically, after the victory of the Cold War, continued the methods of, of, the, of the Cold War and even intensified them. During the time of the Cold War, it was containment. Afterwards, it was rollback. And you can argue it to quite an extent. The United States have declared war on Russia with all those sanctions, and war on Russia also hits Europe. So what I want to say is the United States wants to dictate the Europeans what they are allowed to do, according, for example, as far as the energy supply is concerned. They want to destroy Nord Stream 2. They use the law as a weapon against European enterprises. For example, I don't know if you can see it. I have here a book in French, Le droit, nouvelle arme de guerre économique. That means the United States, for example, uh, brought French enterprises to court and sued them as long until they were bankrupt, so American enterprises could cheaply buy them. So my point is that the United States do not always act as a partner of their European allies. So fourth point, what should we do? What can Europe do? Europe certainly should actively try to cooperate also with the United States to shape this new international order. And there are many fields in which we can cooperate. There are the different fields of security, trade and technology, environment, human rights. In all those fields we can cooperate. But, and that's very important, in order to cooperate, we should develop a European strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy. And when I say security, that goes far beyond military security. Security also means economic security, means health, environment. And in all those fields, the European method of cooperation is far better than the method of military confrontation. So I think we should try at least to persuade the Americans to follow the European way and not the other way around, to follow the European way to solve the problems of today and of tomorrow. And we should defend human rights together, but not only as a pretext
Да.
for political power. So one more sentence. I think Russia should also be our partner. China is already the greatest trading partner of the European Union. And transatlantic relations should be important also in the future, but they must be based also on common interests and they must be based on mutual political understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendelin. It was very interesting, and uh, I admire your optimism at the very end, because after the very realistic picture you have drawn on American interests and how far they go, for example, with this request for 2% of the GDP in European countries they should spend for national defense, let's say for American weapons, which is obviously the reason behind this request. That doesn't look to a fast change of American foreign policy. What can Europeans do for this aim? I see that in several circles, also very traditional Western ones, there is rising the request for an European security architecture, because they want to escape from this enemy picture policy of the Americans. How do you see that?
Me, Walter.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. That's what I mean with European authentic identity. European, we have to, the first question is, to what extent are we able to formulate our own interests? To what extent are we able to unite behind those interests? What you said, that's exactly what I also meant. In my opinion, this pledge to spend 2% of the GDP for armament, that's totally a pledge oriented toward the past. And if you would allow me, I could also say a few more words about new dimensions of security and power. Because in former times, in international relations, military power was the basis of the strength of every country. Why? Because there was one issue, which country is the strongest? And the one who had the biggest army could dominate the others, could exert his will, his influence upon his others. In former times, 90% of international power was military power. Nowadays, in my opinion, only 10% of power internationally is military power. All the other power is split up on different groups, from NGOs to the media, to the enterprises, even to individual persons. And especially security used to be to 90% military security. Security today internationally is only up to 10% military security, and the rest is, as we see, health security, monetary security, economic security, human rights, education, human security. That's the point. And that's what I mean when we should try to orient the United States towards the future, how we see it. Let me take one more point. Who was great in history? Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon the Great, those people who had a strong military and could conquer the others. And today we often hear Europe doesn't count anymore because our military is not strong enough. It's ridiculous. That's a reasoning of the past. We cannot say anymore we are great because we have the power to send our aviation or our planes or our guns to other countries. We have power today if we succeed to influence the European way, high standard of living, human rights, spending on environment, spending on international aid. So in my opinion, the European approach towards international relations is the progressive approach, and the American approach is the approach of the past, based on Thomas Hobbes, who said life consists in fighting wars one against another all the time. I think that's still the basic. I think that the Enlightenment has changed the sides. 200 years ago, the enlightened people were in the United States. They have become militaristic. Now we in Europe, we are much more enlightened because we want to solve international problems and conflicts by cooperation and not anymore only by confrontation.
Okay, thank you, Wendelin. Are there any short questions to Wendelin, because we are already in the time for the second part? If this is not the case, yeah, Vladimir?
My only worry is to get the text of the presentation in order to, to work for the compendium of papers. And thank you very much. Very impressive.
Okay, thank you, Vladimir. Now, I think it's good to talk about Russia and Europe. And let's see whether Alexander Ra has the same optimistic view at the end as Wendelin Edmeyer had. Alexander, you have the floor.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a big honor to be with you. And yes, I will be optimistic at the end. But allow me to make, a pragmatic analysis on the situation in which Europe is today. And let's try to draw the consequences out of this situation. I want to say that in general, the European Union, or what happened in Europe after 45 was, of course, a success story. We have witnessed 30 years ago a historical reunification of the West and the Central Eastern part of Europe after the end of the Cold War. I think it was done smoothly, successfully, especially from the economic point of view, and for many people as a surprise. Second, a second success story for the European Union is a transformation of the European Union from a purely economic bloc to a political union. That also happened 30 years ago through the reunification of the West and East on the continent. Before that, the EU was focusing on economic issues, now more on political than economic. But there had been also other dysfunctional elements in this Europe, which we had also to see and detect. First, yes, we have a political union, European Union, but we failed to become a United States of Europe. I think this is something what we have to understand. More political Europe is impossible due to the various smaller conflicts and also the failure to act even in this issue of pandemic now in a solidarity manner in Europe. It's shown that we are far away, probably from the idea of a united state here, and possibly that has now become a real dream and not more. Second, there is a failure, an obvious failure of the Europeans to create their own foreign and security policy on neither of the important questions, whether Russia or China or anything, any other country, Middle East. We have seen real solidarity, and especially in the issue of migration. Here we are stuck on that problem for the past 6 years. We also failed as Europeans to create democracies, Western liberal kind of democracies at Europeans' periphery. Neither is Ukraine or Moldova or Belarus and a true democratic state, nor are the Arabic countries or Northern African states, which are being regarded as part of European strategic periphery, democratic states, or even close to this. In other words, what I want to say, the European Union has been always a splendid project for the times when the sun shines. But when the crisis overlaps, then the EU is becoming shaky. Walter Schwimmer reminded us on the creating of the Council of Europe in '49, after World War II. The Council of Europe was designed to unite Western Europe on common values, on liberal and democratic values. That is important for the history of Europe. And so, indeed, the European Union, one can say, has become today not so much an economic entity, not so much a security system, not so much a geopolitical actor, but it says of itself that it has become a club of values, but it has become the declarative policy of the European Union. My question to you is, to colleagues, is why then the Paris Charter, which had to become the fundament for the reunited Europe after the end of the Cold War, has failed to bring Europe together, to unite Europe on these common values. And I'm not talking about problems which within this Paris Charter system had been created towards Russia, but many other countries as well. So in my humble view, the Paris Charter as a document, as a fundament for Europe has in many ways failed. Also, we will not consider this. The European Union underwent maybe too many and severe crises in the 21st century, which in certain ways stopped it or hindered it from becoming more a political union and more united. We had the financial crisis, not forget about this. It's still not over, not 100% over. We had this migration crisis in 15, which I mentioned before. And we have now the Corona pandemic, and nobody knows how Europe will look after the end of this pandemic, to be honest, because we had to distribute the funds, the money. The northern countries of Europe helped to help the southern countries, and so on and so on. And there is no united policy in the vaccination of the European population, and so on. So a big question mark about how we will go out of this third and more severe crisis. And indeed, they will become a burden for Europe in future. We have to see it politically. So the winds of change are there in Europe. Let's talk about them. In my view, if we talk about the geopolitical factor, and it has been said before, the European Union is of course not Europe. The European Union, I would say it even more drastically, has lost its monopoly on Europe. The European Union is still economically in good shape, relatively in good shape, but as we have seen in the Corona crisis, politically dysfunctional. Look at that. The United Kingdom has left the European Union, and the Brits will create a different Europe next to our continent. They will compete with us. They will be closer to the United States than to Germany and France, in my view. Turkey has closed their doors to the European membership. They have understood that for 60 years they are waiting for the invitation to join the European Union, and that will never materialize. So they will also now begin with the geopolitics and other interest-driven policy to be part of a different Europe on this continent. There is also no further eastern expansion of Europe towards Ukraine or other countries of the post-Soviet space without a clear agreement with Russia about a kind of understanding with Russia, in my view. So this conflict with Russia is also something which tears, in reality, Europe in many ways apart. And China has become the creditor for many of East European countries in times when Brussels is not capable of supporting them financially if they want to. So China has also become an important player and factor in European politics on the European continent. And of course, fifth, not forget the United States, which has redefined its role in Europe after Trump, now under Biden. In which way, we will find out more precisely when Biden delivers his first trip to Europe next month. So the rifts political inside Europe are serious, and they are seen. There is this conflict over values between the western part of Europe and eastern part of and Eastern countries. Remember that Poland and Hungary are under deep pressure from Brussels to fulfill democratic norms, which they are obviously not doing. Sanctions are being threatened against these two countries, members of the European Union. The conflict is about rich and poor European countries during the Corona crisis. We have seen that Schengen as a system is practically non-existent. Basically, it failed to work out as it should during the migration crisis in 2015 and is not functioning during Corona. So we have to rethink how to repair or to change all that situations after the pandemic ends. And there is, of course, a conflict between Germany and France on the other hand, and East European countries, some of East European countries, over how to deal with Russia, whether get Russia closer to Europe, whether cooperate with a country like Russia, or isolate Russia and drive Russia away from Europe completely to Asia. This is also happening. We have two self-conflicting and two self-excluding concepts of Europe. One is supported by the United States and some of the East European countries of the EU and NATO, which say that the transatlantic Europe, and they stress the word transatlantic, should be prolonged from Vancouver to Donetsk, Ukraine in, Russia out. Then there is another second concept of Lisbon-Vladivostok Europe, of a wider Europe, which is being supported more in Germany and France and old Europe. I think that the wider Europe, Europe with Russia, maybe not as a common value system and even not as a common player, but as a common maybe entity, as a common economic and even also security space, is and will be the path to a strengthening of Europe in the 22nd century, I'm convinced, vis-a-vis Asia, which is becoming stronger and stronger vis-a-vis Europe and other players on the global stage. The European thinkers, intellectuals should turn towards realism. And I see this as our major task of our institute and of our group, maybe to formulate this kind of new realism, because it's high time to do it. The European foreign policy can't become global, but it should become global, but can't become global as long as it sticks only to value-driven political principles. The interest-driven policy is needed, return to pragmatism, and if you want, also to some kind of geopolitical thinking in the 21st and 22nd century. And exactly our think tank in Vienna should develop probably the concept with our rich experience here of such a policy vis-a-vis other actors in this so important and crucial multipolar world. Thank you for your attendance, for hopefully for friendship and support in future. That was my short remark.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I think it was quite interesting for all of us, your view of the situation. And I share your analysis in many points. The European Union was in a very good way, paradoxically, until Maastricht, when the leaders believed that you can create a political union just by decoration and not by changing the substance. And it was totally ruined by the Treaty of Lisbon when it gave the power to decide to the heads of state and government of the 20, at the time 28, now 27 member countries. Imagine that the policy of the United States would be defined by a conference of the governors from Texas to New Jersey or something like that. That would not function. And it's not function in Europe. When there is political action needed, you see the weak side of the political union of the EU. And I fully share, when Europe wants to continue to play a role in the world, one has to find a way how to include all European countries. To re-include Great Britain as a non-member of the EU, but to include also Russia. I'm not sure whether Turkey can be re-included in the European dream. Russia, I'm sure, Russia should be a part of that. Any questions for Alexander?
No, I would like, can I make a statement?
Yeah.
You
Not
see,
too long,
for
please.
me, no. The basic problem in Europe now is that we live in a time of a divided sovereignty. We have given up national sovereignty, but not created European sovereignty. We have given up national currency, but no common economic policy. We have abandoned our borders, but we have no migration policy. And as far as the migration policy is concerned, I was ambassador to Canada. I always ask myself, what is the basic difference between the Austrians who migrated to Canada and the foreigners who are now coming to Austria? One basic, we are always talking about numbers and Frontex and who should have which competences. One basic difference is this. The Austrians who moved to Canada wanted to become Canadians by all means. And now I've read the statistics about the people from the Maghreb coming to France, but they don't want to become French people anymore. I think that's a very decisive point. Thank you.
But maybe Patrick will give us an answer to the question, but Alexander, if you want.
I want to say that in a paper which maybe our institute will develop on the future of Europe, we should really stress what has been said actually by everyone today, that we need for stronger decision making in Europe, the majority votes principle in Europe, and not the consensus. Otherwise, we will not move forward. And second, in my view, we need a Security Council of Europe, a Security Council of Europe, an idea which has been already developed within the OSCE 20 years ago. I remember we spoke about this when I worked for the German Council on Foreign Relations. It was not supported firstly by the United States, which saw this as a rival institution for NATO. But if Europe wants to become autonomous, we need this kind of new institution. And I think it will more stabilize Europe as we think.
One more point, because the neighborhood countries were mentioned, Northern Africa and the Ukraine. I followed the Barcelona process, which had the goal to bring Northern African countries closer to Europe. You cannot spend more $1 billion or euros than we did. And also the NGOs were very active. And the result was the Arabic Spring. And the result of the Arabic Spring was new dictatorships. So I think democracy building, and we see a similar process in Afghanistan, takes much more time than we have ever considered in the past. Thank you. Question also, is that right or not?
Alexander, you want to reply?
No, I agree. I agree fully.
Okay, fine. Is there any other question to Alexander? Is not the case.
Dr. Schwimmer, can I ask a question? Thank you. Thanks. I hope you can hear me. Thanks to the speaker. My name is Côme Carpentier. I wanted to ask Sharar what he, when he mention was made that you would have to have majority rule in the EU. However, would not by itself further weaken Europe, because a number of countries would not accept to go along with a simple majority, because that essentially not only challenges but practically annuls the principle of national sovereignty. And I don't think European countries are willing to give that up even the smaller countries are just, in fact, they are even more attached to it than maybe some of the bigger countries. So I think that might in itself prove to be an acceptable proposition.
It is true, but if we will not get the majority rule, then we will not become an actor by its own. Then every decision can be stopped, even every majority decision. And only I mean, imagine we will now maybe integrate also the West Balkan states into the European Union, and maybe one day Ukraine. What will happen? I mean, everybody, of course, has its own interests, its own views, and that will become a historical stalemate for the whole European organization. And I think we will not survive as a political entity like that. Then we will turn back to the idea of a common economic market, of a custom market, where we all will be happy, but we will rule out the possibility to have a strong Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Europe, a strong defense ministry of Europe, a strong presidency, and so on, because all the decisions had then to be discussed with now 29, and tomorrow maybe with 40 countries.
Yeah. Nothing to say against. Yeah. Good. Thank you. And I call upon the next one. And this is also interesting in this context. To what extent is the Eurasian concept competing with the ideas on Europe we discussed? So Vladimir Kulиков, our scientific director, wants to introduce this theme.
Dear Walter, dear colleagues, thank you very much for letting me speak. Possibly I'm a little bit more philosophical than appropriate for this meeting, but finally at the end of my short presentation, I think we have many reasons for optimism, thinking and talking about relations between Europe and so-called Eurasia in all concepts, larger Eurasia or Eurasian economic space or whatever. Even the issue of greater Eurasia is a kind of oversimplification of the real processes taking place in this part of the United Continent. So I'm sorry if I'm going to be a little bit too, my presentation will be a little bit difficult to understand, but let me nevertheless read this text. We have all met 20 years ago at a very important public intellectual exercise. We called it World Public Forum Dialogue of Civilizations, and it has existed quite fruitfully, and we all see that some relations in between us and eagerness to present our views is still there. So I come from this first 10 years of dialogue, which I completely accepted. And I'm happy that Dr. Švimmer has allowed me to join the international team of the International Institute of Socioeconomic Studies, which represents the European view and its search for integrity, as well as the certain possibilities of cooperation with other institutions and people's diplomacy initiatives. Since we have first met, the world has disintegrated into millions of clusters and shades, and we're still building a system out of it. Those who tend to analyze general patterns objectively find themselves in the hands of the narrow professionals. In fact, the real world disintegrates only in our minds, since it is highly likely to exist relatively independently of us. However, this statement is not indisputable for an educated late Soviet person who is able to assume the existence of such a connection with his consciousness. Perhaps the best way to bring it into a kind of homogeneous state is the sociology of wide range of reflections, which brings reality into line with numbers, semantic constructs, and the possibility of analyzing the present and the future. And in this sense, the so-called system analysis is fully correlated with sociology as a pragmatic subsystem. The Eurasian analytic world and political elites recognize Immanuel Wallerstein, who not only developed and popularized this very concept of the world systems in the 60s under the influence of French historian Fernand Braudel, but also publicly announced it collapsed shortly before his death as the undisputed classic of system analysis. However, when communicating with colleagues and experts who are not prone to sensational leaks, he spoke about this much earlier. It seems that his neo-Marxist views in general have nothing to do with it, just that the post-Soviet analytical space is traditionally inclined to check numerous events and world dynamic with these categories. This, of course, does not exclude the presence of other developed intellectual schools in Europe and in Russia, just like those who support such a phenomena as globalization 2.0 or 3.0, or approximations of the actual thinking about the world order as an asymmetric construction. Let us try, however, to use this method, which seems to me the most suitable for data transmission between Europe and, let's say, other spaces within the framework of the necessity, in my view, to facilitate better European understanding with Russia, which lasted already for several decades and led to current mutual misunderstanding. Moreover, at least one circumstance, the pragmatization of approaches and the increased professional training of the expert communities on both sides of this unpleasant wall of all countries from both sides of it is quite conducive to such reflection. Moreover, the proposed or expected elite transformation is unlikely to exclude this component in the relations between two parts of one continent or even conglomerate of countries over a vast area from Lisbon to Vladivostok or from Lisbon to Shanghai, despite the relevance of other approaches and dimensions. And I have three assumptions which I would like to point out. They're a little bit eclectic, but please forgive my philosophical background. Assumption number one, elites and political leaders throughout the above-mentioned space will always speculate about the possible future of international relations based on considerations of world system nature for a long time. It will never change. In fact, as far as the analysis of the post-Soviet space or Russian intellectual space is concerned, the significance of influence of liberal views is still small or already small. That's a kind of just paradigm. One could call it conservative, the other could call it traditional, but it will stay there. As a kind of a confirmation of let's say, my approach is recent publication of Stephen Walt from Harvard University in the latest issue of Foreign Policy magazine. At the risk of oversimplifying China, and I personally think it's a general observation about most of the Eurasia, preferred world order is essentially Westphalian. if emphasizes territorial sovereignty and non-interference, embraces a world where many different political orders exist, and privileges the supposed needs of the collective security, just like economic security, over the rights or freedoms of the individual. That's the, let's say, the basis of, at least from my point of view, of the Eurasian political thinking. But assumption number 2, the frequently updated topic of regionalization as a manifestation and at the same time a counterweight to globalization in numerous dialogues at the highest level can result in a rigid contrast between the experience of European and Eurasian programs of corresponding profile, I mean integrational programs. But it was not possible to identify significant differences in their general direction. Very difficult to identify the difference between the search of European integrity and integral mechanisms, and same for Eurasia, at least from the Russian, let's say, perspective. Very difficultly. I mean, they're absolutely the same. According to Professor Karori, whom we would like to welcome in one of our next meetings, he wrote us a letter, it is quite reasonable to talk about the consistent nature of both integration processes, at least when it comes to such a goal setting for integration projects like Great Eurasia, Larger Eurasia. Also, in his opinion, it is difficult to assume that such a competition can be a meaningful task, taking into account the Eurasian specifics that have been increasingly revealed recently. I will add that the assumptions about Eurasia of different speeds or the use of early projects of European integration, if we remember them, which were actively designed half a century ago, may well have an expert perspective. I am referring to the proposals voiced during a series of seminars about 10 years ago with Greek political scientists about the early project of European integration, which proposed a regular rotation of the next leader in the EU with the replacement of 3 leading participants, 1 large and 2 smaller countries, with a corresponding redistribution of development resources in order to balance and harmonize the overall standard of living in the EU countries. I think Eurasian integration is somehow connected with this set of views. Assumption number 3, as our longtime friend and conference participant Pasquale Policastro from University of Szczecin has proposed in connection with the idea of a larger Eurasia, and we also are waiting for his personal seminar within IISA's Zoom seminars, we might be interested to develop a reflection on the intrinsic meaningfulness of local space for the existence of the individuals and all human communities. In this context, resilience is defined as the acknowledgement of the space where we live and the capacity to make a viable use of it. We wish to show that a proper approach to the space where we live in all its potential is a driver for a general acknowledgement on a foot of equality of the spaces in which each of the human communities and each individual live. For this reason, a proper approach to the concept of the practice of resilience appears helpful for planetary sustainability, for equality in international relations, and for the acknowledgement of the dignity of each human being. My final remark is quite simple. We might think of the world and its fluctuations in the same way the forum has brought us together some 20 years ago. I would very much propose to research some kind of approach, which I personally, well, being quite lonely here in Moscow, called positive realism. It might be the name of our intellectual and practical exercise, or since our minds are stronger than we have met some 20 years ago, we can choose some other option. Play with any thought without accepting it. As Aristotle has coined it, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain the thought without accepting it. So in my view, European positive realism is the challenge, and in my view is a perspective. As for all of us of the experts that have come together today and tomorrow or on the 12th of May, it's our own choice only. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vladimir. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. As you pointed out yourself, you are a philosopher. And
I'm sorry.
Some philosophic ideas about the Eurasian concept and the positive realism, as you called it. It's not as easy as that, in my view. When you said that particular Asian states want to see the world order like the Westphalian order,
Yeah.
Non-interference, respect for full sovereignty. Some governments, and the more liberal governments, will be pressed by their people. They get the pictures. They get, for example, the pictures of Myanmar, where the military is shooting on its own people. And governments are under pressure. Help the people of Myanmar. And they don't know how to do it. So is there really a place for this positive realism?
In between relations between European community and the Eurasian community, there is much space for, in my humble opinion, much space for positive realism. Not everywhere, but huge.
Yeah, but how to deal with what I would like to call a tragedy, like in Myanmar?
There are all deficient, programs like providing some assistance, and what can anyone do in Myanmar? No,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible. There are certain regions where the interests of the let's say modernization are absolutely non-working. It's just, you have to accept it.
Perfect. Other questions to Vladimir?
May I say something?
Come, please. Yes. Come on.
Thank you. Vladimir, in fact, I was just referring to what was said about Myanmar, that indeed there is a realization on the part of its neighbors that multilateralism is quite ineffective, because what you are doing is polarizing further the conflict. And at that point, for example, India, which is obviously not happy about its neighbor Myanmar going back to military rule, but at the same time, India feels that interfering and taking sides too openly would simply lead to Myanmar getting closer to China and maybe to other states, and therefore an even larger number of refugees coming into India without India having any effective means of changing the situation in Myanmar. So basically, you go back to the old Westphalian politics of waiting and seeing, as the British like to say, and sort of seeing what side the dice falls, because if the army manages to keep control, then there is not much you can do short of invading the country. Otherwise, you just have to, you don't want to be on the wrong side and then be penalized, which obviously would not improve the lot of the average people in Myanmar.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Not the case. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, Next on the program is Tari.
I think we have Patrick.
Patrick, yeah, okay. Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you. In fact, I am not yet prepared to make a presentation, but I was struck and I found Wendellin's analysis very helpful. And let me note in parentheses what you would call disclosure. While this discussion may be among Europeans, I actually happen to be a native of the United States, and I've been involved in international affairs and living in Europe for more than 30 years. I'm also a former senior official, if you can call it that, senior migration specialist at the ILO, the International Labor Organization, which is part of the United Nations system. I actually wanted to pick up and make a comment and hope this can be expanded on in a future session. Wendelin was very clear, I think, in underlining the fact of American exceptionalism and the fact of a state or a United States that is continuing to exert not only an exceptionalism in its role in the world, but an exceptionalism in proposing that we remain in a unipolar or a monopoly dominated world in which it remains, and its project is to remain, I can be a bit facetious and say somehow the center of the universe. My concern in listening to this discussion so far is that there is clearly a huge dimension for dialogue on the transatlantic relationship and on, in fact, the economic, political, social, and diplomatic, and even military relations that have been evoked in some of the previous comments. In this discussion, though, I become increasingly concerned that on the one hand, substituting a bipolarization for a unipolarization in a multipolar world doesn't seem to me to be either adequate or certainly not a recipe either for adequate exploration or for any kind of success. And by that, I mean, there is a certain exceptionalism that I hear in this discussion of looking at the Europe-United States relationship and binary symbiosis without looking at the fact that the real change in the world is not moving from a unipolar or to a bipolar, or that we are in a bipolar world, but rather it's very clear we are in a multipolar world, and a multipolar world divided between the poles that have power and those that are or remain relatively, shall we say, dispossessed, either from economic, social, political, or diplomatic power. And I want to pick up, just as an introduction, perhaps to a future discussion, again on Vladimir's noting that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the World Public Forum Dialogue of Civilizations in Rhodes, and noting that that potential, I think, was never realized in establishing what still seems to be missing, which is a space for a multipolar, a multilateral dialogue that's independent of states and institutions, in contrast to the United Nations, that while it is the epitome of multilateralism, it's certainly not independent from the views and the pressures and the interests of its powerful members. And I rather think, moving ahead, I would suggest we need some further discussion in this forum with the participants here and others, not only on the axis that is the center of today's discussion in terms of the transatlantic relationship and the Europe-United States relationship, but to look at contextualizing that in the fact that we keep also referring to the relative rise of other powers, in particular China, and the relative restoration of the Russian Federation to being a very powerful state and country. And we have also, not here but elsewhere, looked at the rise of the political formation or the political economic formation of the BRICS countries. That certainly notes that India, South Africa, Brazil are among, or were among, in the recent past, rising political economic powers that need to be contended with or need to be cooperated with. And the sum of what I want to say is to come back and explore what's next in terms of a space, a place, and a content of dialogue that needs to inform this dialogue in a way that it's not being, I think, yet informed, or not being certainly informed so far today. And at the same time, underlining that without a multipolar dialogue and a space for that to take place independent of the interests of states that essentially are the parties to the existing multilateral forums and the multilateral institutions, there needs to be a discussion that can really cut through some of the issues, and I would say that needs to allow for a dialogue between also the interests of peoples, populations, and beyond this concept of dialogue of civilizations. But I think the notion of the dialogue of civilizations was clearly to say we're going beyond and trying to discuss outside the parameters of a world organized in power and diplomatic dimensions through and by individual states. And the lack in that of the representation either of the interests of what we could call groupings of populations, people, civilizations, and so on. I'll leave it at that, but it's just to both suggest the need to look at what we're doing now as a forum for also moving forward and establishing that space and place of continuing dialogue, because certainly the issues we put on the table aren't going to be resolved here. And I actually would have liked, as Walter mentioned or kind of invited some moments ago, to speak to comments that have come up in areas where I'm more specialized on. But again, I think we need a continuing space and place for the dialogue, for publication of this, and for involving a number of other actors that aren't around this table, which I would have to say, having been often myself in similar forums, we need also at this table to be more than a group of primarily white older men and European or European related at that basis, but even to discuss Europe and North American relations. Thank you for that, and hopefully I can be invited to come back another time with a little bit more of substance than just rhetoric.
Thank you very much, Patrick. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for many hints for what we should do in the future. And you have led the way for dialogue, which is, I think, in both our opinion, the only way to solve conflicts on a global level. So we should continue to discuss, and of course, I'd like to see once in your expertise on migration, and to discuss with you the issue of migration. To what extent is it a European problem? Yeah, is it a global problem? Looking to the figures, yeah, it's not really a European problem. That's maybe it's assumed in Europe as a European problem. But the number of migrants coming to Europe is nothing against the number of migrants you have on the African continent, from one African country to the other one, or from one region in a large country to the other one. So that should be discussed between us. And so thank you very much for your contribution.
Well, Walter, just let me interject that I would like to speak of it again in a contextualized picture, because my work on labor migration and on migration is really in the context of looking at what is it going to take to provide for the economic sustainability of the West and of other countries, and in particular vis-a-vis the West and the broader Europe. The intersections with changing technology, population dynamics, declining numbers in the workforces. And when you say the numbers of migrants, it should be borne in mind that the country in the world with the largest number of migrants is the United States. The country in the world with the second largest number of migrants in the world, mainly migrants employed in the economy, is the Russian Federation. And I think Germany is way up there as the fourth or something like that. So we're looking, and the way I would suggest we approach migration is again in the context of the underlying issues that Gwendolyn, Alexander, Vladimir all kind of at least touched on when you speak of economy and you speak of, if you will, the sustainability of what it takes to maintain our world, our population, our people, and to ensure welfare and ultimately peace rather than conflict over, in some cases, poorly stewarded resources. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else? Make a comment, ask a question? If it's not the case, I think the next on the program is Johannes Merck, who is an expert on Latin America. He has taught on Latin American universities. He's now back to Austria and lecturer at Diplomatic Academy of Vienna on Latin America. So Johannes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Walter. I am very happy to see many colleagues again here in this forum. I am also, as Vladimir already said, an old member of the World Public Forum. And I would like to make a connection what just Patrick said. The World Public Forum was always designed as a space not only among civilizations, but also among the idea that we have to look to other regions than just to the usual ones. That means Europe, in this case also Russia, and the United States. I think that was always the very attractive part of this forum. We had the possibility to have a very broad exchange with colleagues from other continents, and actually I met in that occasion also some very important friends from Brazil with whom I still cooperate academically. So I applaud this initiative and I'm happy to be part of this forum. I have some notes. I have not prepared a full paper, but I would like to share with you some notes. I would like to do what I think is very important in these days and what the students at the at the Diplomatic Academy here in Vienna claim to the authorities, that there are more seminars on Africa, on Asia, and on Latin America, which is good for me, in order to have a broader and a fuller picture of the world. It is impressive how now the younger generation in the universities are claiming that you have to take into consideration political thought from Latin America, from Asia, from Russia, from Africa into your curriculum when you are teaching political thought, when you are teaching political theory. And I think that is something that this group can even advance more. Yeah? Among them also the ideas of, I actually made a paper together with a colleague from Russia, a paper comparing Euro-Asian thought with Latin American thought. Yeah? There are similarities, there are bridges, there are connections. And I think this is a very important forum to do that. I see at the same time also, and that's the interesting part when we go now to the relationship between Europe and Latin America, I see in the younger generation of students, I have several students from Latin America at the Diplomatic Academy, a lot of interest in studying the European integration process and trying to see how up to a certain point on a political level, they can reach similar heights. That is something that is at this point studied by a student of mine. She looks at this comparison. And it's very interesting to see that they know it will not work. It will not work copying the European model, and they have to search. They're in this discussion how they can reach this. And this has to be different than the European approach. I just want to give you some bullet points. On the one hand, they perceive the European Union, and I'm talking here about a literature study on the Latin American vision on the European integration process. Okay, so we look now at a Latin American view on the European process, and they see basically there is economic cooperation, there is an institutionalized political dialogue, and there are trade relations. So that is perceived as three pillars of the European integration process from their point of view. The interesting issue is they lack all of this. They lack all of this. They have first this issue with the economic cooperation, which is very weak, actually, in many cases in Latin America, due to the fact that they are doing much more extra-regional trade than intra-regional trade. The intra-regional trade is very weak in Latin America and compared with the European Union. There are some countries they have quite a strong connection, like Argentina and Brazil, but in general term, there is a lot of lack of economic integration. Secondly, there is this equivalent to the institutionalized political dialogue, which we have in Europe, due to the fact even government changes, even they are left-wing government coming in and right-wing government leave are coming and go, there is an institutional form of dialogue within Europe. This does not exist in Latin America. The reason why is presidencialismo. That means the presidents, they make the foreign policy in these countries. And this means, obviously, when there is a president really interested in an integration process, then there is a possibility of advancement. That had happened, for example, during the Lula's time. Bolsonaro nowadays is not interested in any form of integration or in advancing integration processes. So he abandons that field, and the whole process that was gained and the space was gained politically was gained in Southern America with the Mercosur, for example, on the political level is lost. That is the problem, because you have this presidential system where the protagonism is very big. And then the third issue is an issue, obviously, of history, and that is the problem of giving up sovereignty to the fact that all countries had to fight for their independence. So they were already on a colonial regime, and obviously they were the first in the global south becoming once again independent in the 1830s of the 19th century. But that is now one of the impediments to advance in the integration, because these countries are very, very reluctant to give up sovereignty, which obviously should be one of the pillars also of advancing in integration. You cannot have a free lunch there. I mean, you cannot remain completely independent, and on the other hand, you want to integrate. So these are the problems they perceive. The students, I had several discussions on these issues. I said to them, you look now at the European Union, and I tried to give you here the summary of these discussions. And so Europe is not necessarily seen as a model to copy, but something that they have to invent themselves in order to advance in the direction. I will today, I'm sorry for that, not give you the answer how they see it, because at this point my there are 3 students doing this work. They want to present a sort of policy paper in order to advance from a Latin American point of view the question of integration. I think on an epistemological level, now I go a little bit, I am a philosopher by training, like Vladimir. I think this is an epistemological issue here in terms of we have to accept, and they also have to accept, they cannot emulate and they cannot copy this same model, European model for their continent. So I think the openness and also the willingness by thinking themselves, which was actually a big, this was a big message by José Martí already in the 19th century by a text that is widely read until our days. I use it still in my classes, that is called Our America, where he says, well, we Latin Americans, we have to create our own university, and we have to know the history of the Incas, even we don't know so much about the history of the old Greeks. So I think that is exactly at stake at this point in Latin America. I'm talking more obviously on the intellectual debates, but I think that is a very important aspect of the Latin American intellectual fabric. And I want to mention a second issue with Latin America and Europe. There are 3 things that are important. Europe remains, the EU remains still the first foreign investor in the Latin American region. It is the largest provider of development assistance in the region. And it has as strategic partners Mexico and Brazil, and now they try, the European Parliament tried to lobby that also Argentina will become a 3rd strategic partner. But the big elephants in the room, the very big one is China. Yeah? In some cases, like in the case of, and now I go to the geopolitical sphere, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, and Chile, China is #1 in trade. It's not anymore the States, the United States, and not the European Union. It's China. And that's a first element. The second element is, and that's also interesting, the role of Russia. The role of Russia is growing very much also in Latin America. One of the reasons is Vladimir Putin has a very good advisor, our colleague Davidov. We know him. He is at the Academy of Science in Russia. We know him all for many years, and he is, I think, a very good advisor. And Russia is doing now something that is also China doing, but Russia doing it very efficiently. That is the so-called vaccine diplomacy with Sputnik. It's very interesting to observe that in Latin America, well, now an anecdote, all my friends in Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia are already vaccinated. Myself, I'm not vaccinated so far, yeah, by Sputnik. Yeah. And Sputnik and Argentina, that's also very interesting data. Argentina is starting in June with the production of Sputnik vaccine in the first country on the continent. Yeah. So especially with Argentina, there is a very strong tie now. Fernandez is a moderate left-wing president, and he saw this opportunity up to a certain point to get the vaccines already in December 2020. So Argentina already authorized the Sputnik vaccine in 2020, at the end of the 2020. And the last, and now I want to finish because I don't want to occupy here the whole space. The last point I think is interesting as from a Latin American point of view, Cuba. Cuba has also 2 aspects with Europe. First of all, it sent its brigade, as you may know, Henry Reeve that is a brigade that was established by Fidel Castro in order to make diplomacy, medical diplomacy. That would be a whole topic, actually. I hope one day we can discuss this issue also. This medical diplomacy. Cuba has a large medical facilities to train students from the global south in La Isla de la Juventud. They train doctors for the for South Americans and for the Africans and for some Asian countries. Nobody talks about that, but that's an impressive number. And together with this, they sent this brigade on a symbolic level, but at the end, I think very interesting, to Italy when they had this really big pandemic problem, yeah, in order basically to help. Yeah, this was established, as I said already, by Cuba. Jamaica received help, and other Latin American, Mexico is now receiving help by this brigade. So that is the first I think very interesting point, just with Cuba. The second thing is Cuba is the only country in Latin America that has already a phase 3 study for a new vaccine, Soberana 2, which I suppose will, up to a certain point, have also certain impact, at least locally, for the Cuban population. Yeah, and going back to Europe and Latin America, what is also interesting is there is this 2016 political dialogue and cooperation agreement between Cuba and the European Union, which I found also very interesting, because there was a debate. I will not elaborate now on this, on the definition of human rights. And it's very interesting how they address this. They are saying there should be a balance between the so-called first generation human rights, political rights, as we all know, freedom of association, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, but also second generation human rights, socioeconomic rights, housing, education, and up to a certain point, I was surprised when I read this agreement that there is an acknowledgement that there can be some contradictions in this when it comes to human rights, because when you have nothing to eat, when you have no housing, when you have no education, it's very difficult to exercise your first generation human rights. But that is something I would like to leave for another moment. I would like to say thank you. I leave it until here. I would like to congratulate. I'm the first speaker now talking, well, Euro-Asian, obviously, with Vladimir already started to go beyond this Eurocentric space. Yeah, and I'm very happy that the in your next session, I already told Walter, I'm sorry I cannot attend. I have a class, online class also, but well, you know, even this you cannot do with 2 times on the same time. But I'm very happy that I have here already the program in front of us for next time with China, that our friend Joseph will speak about. He makes an amazing work with his institute, the Galilei International Management Institute in Africa. And I'm also happy that our colleague, I met her also in Rhodes and the forum several times, Tasmini, will talk about Iran, which I think is also very important. So in general terms, I would like to congratulate you. I'm happy back with all of you. Some of you I already know personally, and it's nice to see you all. Last thing, I make now advertisement. I was just nominated now the coordinator of a master program in international relations and urban policy at the University of Applied Sciences here in Vienna. So I hope that the one or other way around this moments and later we can integrate and maybe also invite in order to discuss issues with the students. Most of these students will come from the global south. We have already applications from Iraq, and we have applications from Afghanistan. And so I'm quite sure we will be also forced, like the Diplomatic Academy, by the way, to integrate more non-European ideas, spaces, also discussions into our curriculum and in our daily life as academicians. Thank you very much to all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johannes. It was a very enthusiastic collection of ideas and of we just had buttons. I think Latin America is a kind of not very well known issue in Europe, although the Spanish and Portuguese part of the population of Latin America came from Europe. Yeah? But maybe it's different in Spain and in Portugal. Yeah, of course, they have more relations, but it's more or less ignored in the other public discussions on political ideas. And what you said, on the other side, the European Union is doing a lot of assistance in Latin America. And I also find it very good that the European Union tries to have a cooperation with Cuba. And what you said of human rights of first and second generation. I also agree that it's not enough to be free to sleep under the bridge. Yeah?
The bridge.
That's not my idea of freedom. Yeah?
I know.
Comment?
I know. You know the debate. Yeah. Maybe even better than me.
Any comment or question? To be honest.
I'm sorry?
I'm asking the others.
Sorry.
Whether questions or comments to your statement. Not for the moment, but it's
Walter,
yeah.
Walter, let me jump in on this one just with a comment, having worked a considerable number of years in the Latin American and Caribbean context. And I would just like to diverge a bit in noting that actually Mercosur and the proposed UNASUR, that would be the economic union or the economic community for the entire South American continent, actually in some ways are quite advanced in terms of regional economic and social integration. I think one of the examples for me is a now integrated social security system among the Mercosur countries that is considerably more advanced than the lower level simple social security coordination among EU member countries for portability and access to social security for EU nationals who move to a different country than their own to work. For example, as in the case in my neighborhood, a lot of Brits who used to be in the European Union live in my neighborhood here in France. And there are also quite developed economic communities, the Caribbean community, and emerging, but of course, given the political situation, a very difficult situation in Central America. But they're all systems that come to my attention because they have, for example, freedom, well, say, free movement of trade, free movement of goods and services, and also a relatively. But I'll leave it at that for another discussion. I think, as Johannes himself was saying, he's going to be bringing forth some more material from his research and students, and perhaps we'll have a good debate, better debate on this in the future.
I would like to address some of your points, Patrick, because I fully agree with you. There are regional processes of integration. They are going beyond just some loose integrational processes. And I fully agree with all what you said. But the idea, what I wanted to advance, obviously, was this idea that you have already the text of the 19th century by Jose Marti and also by Bolivar, obviously going beyond the regional integration and going to a continental integration. Yeah, and especially obviously there is a special case with Mexico, as we all know, with NAFTA, which makes it very difficult up to a certain point to integrate into Latin America, because on the other hand, there is this very close connectedness with Canada and the United States. But I agree with you, there are some mechanisms. I mean, you could even also mention the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is very much advanced. Yeah, it's not on the level of the European, but definitely the second best on this planet in terms of integration. Yeah, I agree with you, and the possibility to sue a state and go against your own state and go to Costa Rica and sue your country. So I agree with you, and I thank you also for your correction a little bit when I was maybe a little bit subestimating some efforts that are definitely there. So thank you very much also for that comment. Actually, you made the picture, I think, a little bit clearer. I was maybe a little bit not too close looking when it comes to the regional dimension, the regional one, like Mercosur, you're right. Or, well, there is the possibility maybe that Lula comes back, and I think that would give another dimension once again to integration processes within Latin America. Well, we don't know, obviously, what is going on there. Yeah. But thank you for your comment. Definitely.
Thank you, Johannes. It will not be the last discussion, and we are eager to invite you again to participate in our rounds. Okay.
Walter,
yes.
Do you hear me?
Jens, yes.
Yes. May I make a proposal for the next, referring to the next Wednesday? Is it possible?
Yeah, please.
I was invited, and thank you very much for the topic Europe and the global media. And at the beginning of the second part, there's the presentation of Europe facing a new hegemon, China. And in my presentation, it's not a presentation about traditional media, but in the center of digitalization, clear, of world order. And it's very strong to the center. In the center must be China. And my proposal would be to present as a second part after hegemon China. Would it be possible? I think it could be, from the content, it could be worthwhile.
Yeah, we will try to do so. The problem is, for the moment, that Lucio Martino is not very eager to talk about China. He also wants to talk about transatlantic relations. Yeah, so that they have not yet decided. And then
only a proposal must be
for China.
Better.
But it's clear that we can combine something. I will try to do it. But thank you for the hint.
Mm-hmm.
So I can unfortunately not address ladies or gentlemen. We have come to the end of the first day. I think it was already very successful. It was a confirmation of our concept, the concept of the International Institute for Social and Economic Studies, to establish a platform of free and independent experts to discuss among them without any obstacles. You can speak freely here, as you have seen, but the sum gives then hints for solutions, and that is what we are aimed to. We have discussed and identified 4 areas of concern for mankind in the 21st century, in the next decades. I don't want to be so ambitious to talk about 2080 or 2090. That's it's not my time anymore then. But one can already estimate where the the big problems and the big concerns. We identified, because we cannot deal with everything, you know, four areas where we want to put our arrows on. That is multilateralism, and today was already very good proof that there is discussion on multilateralism necessary, and to strengthen multilateralism. There is the part of the danger of extremism of very different kinds, from Islamist extremism to right-wing extremism in Germany, for example, but others are also concerned about this issue. This is, of course, nobody is allowed to ignore it, climate change. And what discussed already today in some sentences, some parts, is global inequality, because global inequality could be the ground for the next conflicts. And this is when we talk about Europe and the economic strength which is still there in Europe, it's also the responsibility to use this economic strength, power, to reduce global inequality. In particular, think about Johannes. You can contribute to that with your Latin American experience. So thank you very much for joining us today. Hope to see all of you again on the 12th, next Wednesday. And I hope to see all of those who were missing today. But I know there were some problems with the link. The link did not work directly. Some of us, me too, had to copy the link and to put it in the browser. And at the end, it functions. So Johannes is here. He was one of them who complained with full right. We solved very soon this problem. So have a nice evening. Have a nice rest of the week, and see you all next Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Just one addendum, if I may. We will use the same link for the 12th. No new link, this one.
So, and again, if it not works directly, please copy it and paste it to the browser, and then it will work. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Ciao. Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.